Okay, as Mairead said, the next section is all about working in Europe, working in Brussels as a whole. And we're joined by a pretty great panel of speakers. We have Breffney Carpenter from the Permanent Representation of Ireland in the EU in Brussels. We're joined by Ruth McCourt, who's Communications and Development in European Movement Ireland. And finally, we're joined by Conor Mulvihill, who's the Director of the Irish Dairy Industry Association, the IDIA. Essentially, the IDIA is, it represents all primary and secondary processors on the dairy side of things for the 6.4 billion litre milk pool in Ireland. So, and prior to that, Conor worked in ICOS, in the Irish Cooperative Organisation Society, in his Brussels office. And prior to that, Conor was in a parliamentary assistant in the House of the Oireachtas. So, look, you're all very welcome and thank you very much. Breffney, to you first. You said, you know, you're a career civil servant. You joined in 1979, but by far, are you a pen pusher or a 9-to-5 job? You've seen some pretty interesting times with regard to working in revenue, in justice, as well as agriculture, and working in the, negotiating on the WTO. And you've seen riots in Seattle, as well as crisis in Cancun. The civil service is anything but boring, essentially.
Yes, Patrick, it certainly is not boring. I mean, the civil service is not one homogenous organisation. It's 17 different departments. With huge variety of work within those departments. I mean, even within the Department of Agriculture, we've got, significant numbers of vets, agricultural scientists, laboratory people, and policy youngs like myself.
Very good. And Ruth, prior to the European movement, you worked teaching English in Japan, and you also worked in Germany during college. I'm reliably informed by LinkedIn that you speak 5 languages, which is about 5 more than me. And seeing as we're not counting, I'm from Longford, and it takes us days to count in Longford. So your own career path, how is it worked up to so far? Because you essentially work now putting graduates and people into jobs right across Europe. So kind of how does that whole system work?
Sure, well that's one aspect of my job. I'm responsible for the communications and development in an organisation called European Movement Ireland. And that's one area we're very interested in, is seeing more Irish people working in Europe and just opening people up to the opportunities that are there. So we're present at a lot of careers fairs like here today, talking to people about internship opportunities and job opportunities, and kind of just raising awareness that there's a lot more out there than people might realise. There's a great success rate once Irish people get out there. They do really, really well. It's just that sometimes people are held back by a number of issues or perceived issues before actually taking the step. And that's something we try to break down. I suppose my own background, I studied European studies in Trinity as my undergrad, and I did a master's in translation studies, which makes me sound like the kind of typical person in all of this, but what we're trying to get across is there is no typical person. There are spaces for people of every background and every skill set in Europe, in organisations, in the institutions. So that's my background.
And Conor, a pretty interesting background from working in Brussels, working here, and also you worked in the houses of the Oireachtas and the Dáil as a parliamentary assistant. How did you go from coming out of college, what did you study, right into the Dáil, into Brussels, and now back home? So kind of you've kind of come full circle in many ways.
Yeah, Pat. I actually came from a farming background, a beef farm in Limerick.
Sorry about that.
So I suppose
there'll be a collection at the door for you on the way out.
That's it. Thanks very much. So that was the root of it. Little did I know, coming out of that farming background, would I kind of end up where I was working. I never thought I'd be working in the houses of Oireachtas or in Brussels. I came out, my father's still a relatively young man working on the farm as we speak, and there was no prospect of inheritance. So I did history and politics in college, then went in European integration in UL, worked in Irish Wire Products for a number of years after college, and then started maybe the political career in the House of Oireachtas, and the farming piece came right back just to see how farming and agriculture and agri-business was an effect on me and an advantage to me in every place I went, be it in agriculture policy in the House of Oireachtas, and then finally getting the job with the Irish Cooperative Movement in Brussels. So, and then now in the last month coming back home. So it's permeated right through my career.
Absolutely. And maybe, Breffney, to you, you moved away from Ireland perhaps at a time when even simple as something as communication and communicating with family back home, how was that at the time, and how have you seen the progression? Like, you know, the connectivity is a great cliche now, but you know, how difficult was it then as compared to the ease of getting it home and even just talking to people at home now?
Well, just on a practical level, I went to Geneva in 1998 to be our negotiator at the WTO. Back then there weren't direct flights, so you had to take a rather crazy trip. And at the time I had 5 young children, so coming home for Christmas was always Chris Ria plus. The mobile phone had been invented, but the price of calling even back then was horrendous. Just, you know, average stuff. I mean, I remember when I was at Geneva first, the British Foreign Office didn't trust email, so they sent telegrams to each other. How quaint. And that was in 1998, not 1898.
Yeah, so, and I suppose what we've charted kind of how you've gotten all to here now, and maybe, Ruth, you know, what are, and you speak about barriers, and maybe we come back to education a little bit in a bit, but what are the barriers for getting somebody who's interested perhaps working in Brussels or working in maybe further afield? Like, is it language? Is it afraid to cut the apron strings? What is it? What are the barriers that you see?
Sure, those would definitely be two, I suppose, that we see, but we would definitely always say that they're perceived barriers, they're not barriers. So one of the strengths we have as Irish people is that we're native English speakers. Now, generally in work in the EU, especially in the EU institutions, you are expected to have a second language, but the working language more and more is English. So your native language skills are really, really appreciated. And the second thing to know is that Irish is an official EU language now, so we all actually have at least a second EU language, if not a third, when we come out of secondary school. Now, they don't expect you to be fluent in your second language. What they're looking for is a working knowledge, which really is your kind of leaving cert level.
How difficult is it to pick that up? Like, if you're coming, you know, somebody like myself who hasn't learned German in 12 or 13 years, you know, how difficult is it to pick up a language again?
Well, I suppose it varies for everyone. The good news is that there are loads of opportunities out there. There's loads of courses. I'm most familiar with Dublin, obviously, but there are evening courses. There are institutes in all of the main European languages here in Dublin, and you can do some evening language courses. We would be saying you're looking for that leaving cert level. So you're not looking for, you know, complete fluency, and it's very achievable in a set period of time to kind of put your mind to it and do it.
And Conor, yourself, the barriers that you have seen?
Yeah, well, Ruth's going to kill me at this. I lost French after 5.5 years in Brussels. And I'm not lying. But what you do is you pick up bits and pieces of different languages to be kind of polite. Don't ever see language as a barrier. Of course it's advantageous, 100%. But the reality of practicalities of working in Brussels, and remember, Brussels permeates all aspects of agriculture and agribusiness. The environment agenda is climate change, finance, banking, everything. That really comes back to agriculture. So you could be, you know, training at the moment to be a scientist, and you could end up working for the European Food Safety Authority or something like that. So definitely open your mind there in terms of job opportunities that are there. You don't have to be from a farming background. You'd just be very welcome to have an interest in agriculture, and they're screaming out for Irish people particularly out there because of their native language, and more so than the native language, because of our attitude and our friendliness. It really goes down very well out in Brussels.
Very good. And Breffney, barriers from your lengthy experience, to be fair.
Well, languages do help. I mean, it's to be respectful even if you're living in a city to try and learn the language. Of course, the difficulty with Brussels is there are two languages because, you know, they didn't have to split the country, they just split the city in two with the way Belgium is organised. I just think too, Conor touched on it there, where increasingly the emphasis from an Irish perspective over the last year or so has not just been the situation in dairy markets, etc., but because Ireland is a complete outlier in terms of the contribution from agriculture to our greenhouse gases. One of the biggest threats Irish agriculture currently faces in the European Union is to square that circle, because we are, at the end of the day, the most carbon efficient milk producer in the world and the 5th most carbon efficient beef. So historically, people doing my job on the trade negotiations would have talked about a very narrow definition of, you know, import and export. But now a new string to the Irish bow when we argue in relation to, say, trade talks with Mercosur, is why would the European Union, 2 months after coming from Paris on COP21, why would we envisage exporting the most carbon efficient production in the world to some of the most carbon inefficient, thereby increasing global emissions? It's a new argument. It's one we're trying to win hearts and minds in Brussels with, but it's a key argument in terms of protecting the future of our, grass-based production systems.
Sure. And just getting on to the lifestyle, and to yourself, Conor, first. I think it's fair to say that by and large we're hesitant to get away from Ireland. We like to stay here. How difficult is it, then when you go abroad to integrate? And I know that you were one of the most feared full forwards in the Brussels and mid-Europe footballing circles. But how difficult is it to integrate into a new society?
Yeah, like I had a big fear going out. I went out when I was 29, and it was just a real pleasure to go out and see all these different opportunities from people all around the world, the 28 European states, but also to be so close to home. 5 flights a day, 90 minutes away, no costs, so you're never homesick. A fabulously vibrant Irish community in theatre, arts, sport. So it's
and
really
just away
happy.
from the Irish, because Irish people go on holidays and we get off the plane and we head for O'Neill's. But how can we get further into the native?
Yeah, it's more like Brussels is a massively underrated city in itself. It's just having coming back for the last month and trying to get a house in Dublin, and the cost of living in Dublin is light years more expensive, whereas the salaries are much the same. So you're even saving money. 2 hours away is London, 2 hours away is Amsterdam, 2 hours away is Paris, 2 hours away is Cologne. It's an amazing hub right in the centre of Europe, and no matter how you want to live your Brussels life, you could cry into your pint and sing Spansel Hin on a Friday night, or you can be learning French or Dutch or Flemish. You do it the way you want it. So it's just openings everywhere.
And Ruth, on the lifestyle side of things, you obviously are working with people, getting them into Europe, but also you lived, pretty much on the other side of the world.
Yes.
How did you find, again, working in that and going to somewhere that you hadn't been before and living there?
Sure. It was a challenge, no doubt about it. I spent 2 years living in Japan, which, as you say, is pretty much the other side of the world, is a whole different language, a whole different alphabet, absolutely nothing you can grasp onto in terms of familiarity. But it's a great environment in which to kind of learn a lot about yourself, figure out what you're capable of. You have an opportunity to be whatever kind of person you want to be as well, and get into whole new things. I got into traditional Japanese things like tea ceremony, but also was going out to the Japanese clubbing scene. I mean, it's a fantastic opportunity to do when you're young or at any age in your life, really. I think I'm a big advocate of it.
Yeah. And Breffney, the lifestyle?
I think the nature of the job someone like myself is doing, you're interacting with 27 other member states, with the Commission, with the Parliament, and you have to absorb as much of the culture of the people you're dealing with, so you can actually connect in an emotionally intelligent way when you're meeting them. You're not just turning up to say, I'm from Ireland and we want 5 million more in the cap next week. It's a complex set of relationships. The other good thing, and I hope the Brussels tourist office are present, having heard the 2 previous speakers, it is, I spent 20 odd years going to Brussels and just going to meetings in the European quarter. So the backdrop, you see Tony Connolly or the BBC, it always has the Berlaymont and the Rue de Loire. But once you get outside that little concrete jungle, it is one of the most beautiful cities in the world, because nobody took the trouble to bomb it during the war. So it's a magnificent treasure. I mean, it's an architect's dream, I would imagine, of an interest in architecture, and it is a beautiful place to come and visit. So, Mr. O'Leary, 40 quid return, please.
And moving on to the skills, we often hear that Irish people, boxing above the weight. I'll come to you first, Breffney. And Conor speaks about the farmer inside you, kind of being able to go out and maybe push a door that other people mightn't have, and Ruth as well. Moving and shaking and getting things done. Are these the skills that the Irish people have, or what do Irish people bring that is so unique into mainland Europe? Because look, we are part of it as well.
I think it's our openness towards other societies. We're not a closed shop. The Irish are well accepted and respected throughout Brussels, because we make the effort. We don't just go to the Irish bars. You know, there are a lot of other good bars, I'm told, in Brussels.
You wouldn't know that, though.
I wouldn't know personally, no, obviously. And it's trying to get that engagement. You know, I think the Irish too are natural deal makers. I mean, Conor was saying, come from a farming background. I come from not a farming background. I come beside Crumlin's Children's Hospital, where there weren't too many cows when I was growing up. But, you know, you learn a skill set. I was lucky, as I say, preparing me for Brussels. I had 6 years in Geneva, which was another francophone city, so that helped with language also, obviously.
Very good. And deal making, like, is, you know, people might sit here and, you know, we have somebody from the Department of Agriculture, we have somebody who's placed in and we have somebody then who's, you know, kind of a nice senior job as well in Brussels is coming back here. Like, making deals and moving and shaking isn't necessarily for the high-end jobs either. You know, I presume this is a skill set for everybody.
Absolutely. I mean, and the nature of the European Union has changed fundamentally with Lisbon. In the good old days, the Council of Ministers made the decisions based on a European Commission proposal. But the reality now is I have to go up to the Hill all the time, where Parliament is, under co-decision. Because, you know, we now have a joint legislature. So it is not just that 28 agriculture ministers, as one famously said, and I won't name him, when he came out of a meeting and he was asked by his senior official, what's going on in there? We're carving it up. It's a political discussion. Now with Parliament, those days are long gone. It's a much more complex environment in which to do deals. But Ireland, I think, if you look at the last CAP reform, was in 2013 under the Irish presidency. Nobody would have bet on the 1st of January 2013 that the Common Agricultural Policy and the Common Fisheries Policies would both be reformed under the Irish presidency.
And Ruth, that skill set, that same skill set, when companies or programs or institutions are coming to you looking for people, why are they looking for Irish people? Why are they coming to the European Movement Ireland and not European Movement Britain or France?
I think it's a lot of what Breffney and Conor have been saying. It's a certain attitude and a way with people that we have. It's, you know, everybody, when people move away and they start to miss Ireland, sometimes they talk about the crack as what they miss. And I always think that kind of encapsulates what we have. It's that openness, that friendliness, that really kind of builds relationships. And we do that almost naturally. And that's really recognised in Europe, that we're a good bridge, we're good at negotiating, but not in a way that maybe makes you feel like you're negotiating. We're just opening doors and starting discussions.
Sure. And Conor, the Irish skill set, if you want to phrase it as such.
Yeah, it's just, we're inoffensive to everyone. So we've never invaded anyone either. So people naturally like the Irish straight away. You're positively received by any person you come. It's very rare that people go, the way sometimes you hear the stereotype of the boring German or the arrogant Englishman or whatever.
They're Conor too.
That doesn't really happen. You know, in terms of people will always be open to you, people will always, it doesn't even have to be agriculture, it's anywhere, and people are positively disposed to us, and it's been a massive advantage always.
I'd just be interested, we obviously don't have any roving mics or anything, but is anybody interested in working, you know, outside of Ireland at a graduate level, or we've one day or two? Is there, you know, any more that would kind of see the ability just to kind of maybe up sticks and move abroad? Is it something that people think about? I suppose is more, but we have a couple of people there. But finally, and from your own experiences, and I'll start with you, Ruth. What are the opportunities that lie abroad? You know, if you're here if you're looking for people to come into you so that you can place them in different positions, what is your pitch?
It's the breadth, really, to be honest. It's that everything you can imagine exists abroad, and pretty much everything you can imagine exists in Brussels. And that's what we're trying to get across, that it's not just people with 5 languages, it's not just people who've studied politics. If you think about it, the EU is over there making legislation for every area of our lives in 28 countries, so they need experts in every single field, no matter how wide or small. And that's what we're always trying to get across, because people don't necessarily think of it.
And I presume positions that you're filling are in demand, I suppose, well.
Yeah, no, they're very competitive competitions, generally speaking.
Can you just talk us through the process, actually, of how you do it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it varies massively. So there's most people know the European institutions, so the Commission and the Parliament, and they would have very set recruitment procedures, as you can imagine. For getting an internship, you're talking about an application form and maybe a follow-up interview and a length of about 8 months. For permanent positions, you're talking 2.5 years.
Wow.
So that's not something that you say, oh, I'd like to work in the Parliament, I'll go and apply now. It's a kind of a long-term career goal or progression. But then, and this is why, again, we're trying to broaden it out, there are agencies, there are companies, there are non-profit organisations, there's every kind of business over there that's always looking for people. And it's about getting your foot in the door, and then you're over there, like Conor arrived over there when he was 29, and then you're seeing what's happening, and you see the other opportunities that open up, and you can start your commission application maybe.
Conor, second on to you, the opportunities, like if you were, again, if a couple of people stand in front of you, you need to convince them to work abroad or to work in Europe, what would you say to them?
I'd say grab it with both hands, because I've seen my peer group around, the friends I made from most countries, and some make a career in Brussels and they spend their life there. But the vast majority, you're talking anything up to 80-85%, actually do a stint like I have done in Brussels and then use that to go back, often to their home places, but anywhere in the world, because that piece, that Brussels, maybe 2-3 years, even an internship of 8 months, totally it stands out in your CV. And
just explain to me, like, does it really, if somebody's looking at two CVs, will 10 months, 2 years, 5 years jump out on a CV?
Yeah, well, one thing I would say, if I was an employer and I was looking at a CV and I saw someone who had the balls to leave Ireland and go to a foreign country and go to Brussels and I would know as an employer they have been exposed and have made connections across this city, which is just as full of all these different nationalities, I'd certainly be positively disposed towards them. And I've seen it with friends when they go home.
Sure, and Breffney?
Well, on CVs, don't underestimate the value and the importance of an Irish education on your CV. It's much respected in Brussels because our education system is valued over there. Bearing in mind, for example, in the European school in Brussels, the English language stream is funded by the Irish government to ensure that the children of Irish people in Brussels, get the best possible education we can give them. Secondly, Brussels is often referred to as the revolving door, which, the guys are alluding to here. It's about a special, you bring your skills and then you develop them. And yes, you will change jobs more frequently in Brussels if you're outside the institutions, or you'll move between the institutions, because there's a third institution called the Council, which is also a large employer, and that's made up of the 28 member states. There are many, many opportunities for people with speciality, because one thing that's happening with the decline in the size of the European Commission and the expansion of the whole lobby industry is there's a greater concentration now of expertise required. The European Commission doesn't have all the experts that it would need, particularly in an increasingly complex environment. I mean, for example, huge opportunities for people who have environmental studies in their background in Brussels. Massive.
What is, and just a 30-second answer from each, Conor, with yourself, we move there across. What is the one piece of advice you give somebody, 17, 18, or finishing a degree 22, 23? What is the one piece of advice, not just for getting into Europe, but just for career progression as a whole? What's the takeaway message?
My takeaway is to be open. I would, people love to have a goal to say, I want to be a fireman, I want to be a spaceman. Open your mind, see what's there for your skill set, and certainly my last thing is do something you enjoy. If you don't enjoy it, do something else.
Very good. And Ruth?
Agreeing with all that, I'd also say to maybe push yourself past where you think you're capable of reaching. So you only have one shot at it, and just kind of reach for the stars, really.
Very good. And Breffney, finally?
Yeah, don't be afraid to go for the stars. Exactly. I mean, we unfortunately, the Irish are so modest, we tend to undervalue what we bring to the party. We are well respected and in huge demand internationally because of the nature of the kind of people we produce in this country. So don't be afraid. Don't make your decision on what you're going to do when you're 60 at 17. Be prepared to go with, and I know I appreciate this more than 30 seconds, but I'm a diplomat, so we can't do 30-second answers. But yeah, no, don't be afraid to, when you see a door opening, step in through that door into the unknown.
Great. Well, look, thank you very much. I think the takeaway message is work hard, and maybe should try a bit of hard work. But look, for Conor Mulvihill from the IDIA, Breffney Carpenter from the Department of Agriculture and Permanent Representation in Brussels, and Ruth McCourt from European Movement Ireland. Look, if I presume you're happy enough to take questions from anybody who wants to, when we're milling around, that they're, look, a real, every one of them had unique insights into working abroad and bringing it back home as well. But look, a round of applause for our three speakers, please. Thank you.